just had a thought that stems from the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I've been reading and analyzing this book and posting videos doing it, and the video I recently posted, in it I talked about how Dr. Gall is the villain. At least to me, I think she's the villain in the story. And then this thought hit me, because we learned in the original trilogies that game makers don't last very long. Usually they only last a couple years and then they retire or something happens. And I wonder if Snow does it in part that's like it stems from his like uncomfortable like relationship with Dr. Gall, like his dislike, like he respects her but he dislikes her and is a little terrified of her. So I wonder if he gets rid of game makers every couple years as a form of checks and balances to prevent a game maker from getting too powerful and from getting too out of hand. Because in this book, they are giving the population, society is giving Dr. Gall a little too much liberty and freedom to do whatever she wants because they feel too uncomfortable with the Hunger Games and don't want to be directly involved with it. So I wonder if he writes off, to himself, Snow, that he needs to remove game makers every couple years to keep things in balance. So yeah. I know I'm a couple days late to talk about how Lionsgate released the movie poster. I was sadly on vacation and could not talk about it. However, I got tagged in this comment because she's talking about another video I made about a specific painting and how it looks very similar to the cover of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Now, if you don't already know, I have been spending the last 2 months posting videos doing the literary analysis of the entire Hunger Games series as I've been rereading the books. And in one of my videos, I talk about this very specific painting I want to do. I'll post or like tag the video down below if you want to go see the full in-depth video. But I was talking about how the cover was reminding me of a very specific painting, but I couldn't think of it, and I ended up being redirected to an even better one, and it's called Mockingbird and Rattlesnakes by John J. Audubon. Now, this painting you can see has the rattlesnake weaving and hiding its way within the flowery home to attack the mockingbird. And you have, the snake and the mockingjay here. However, now that we got the movie poster looks so much more like the painting. They both have this element of attacking, of fighting, because in the movie poster, you can see that the mockingjay and the snake look like they're both about to fight for that shiny stick, but they look so much more alike. And then when you look at this, it looks a little different. They're a little bit peaceful. It almost looks like, if you look at this, like the mockingjay and the snake are coexisting, and the mockingjay is willfully ignoring the snake's existence on her branch. And the snake also is willfully ignoring, like they have their heads turned away from one another, which I think that's fascinating if you think of the context of the book, because a lot of the characters in the capital in its entirety willfully ignore the problems and things going on because they don't want to unpack, literally sending kids into an arena to kill each other and all these other bad elements after the war. So I think the element of like the two of them kind of willfully ignoring each other is so fascinating. But I do love that the movie poster is trying to, I think, translate more of the violence involved in the two different sides. And I like that it kind of relates to the painting a lot more. So yes, if you want to check out my full video, again, I'm tagging it down below, and I cannot wait for when we finally get the trailer. Like, it has to come soon. Like, the Renaissance is at its peak, I feel like, so please give me the trailer. For the last 2 months, I have been posting a literary analysis of the Hunger Games series as I've been rereading them, and I am currently working my way through the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And I just want to talk about how nature is a very big element in both the original trilogies and the prequel series, and it's fascinating to look at both the relationship Katniss and Snow have with nature, because to Katniss, the forest is sustenance, life, freedom, whereas Snow, we see in the prequel that he is more afraid to have his back to the forest than if he was to have his back to the District 12 citizens who are coming to watch one of their neighbors be hanged. Now, we know at least up to 10, we don't know how much farther, but at least by 10, the 10th Hunger Games, the arenas were predominantly just whatever was left over stadiums, and they were predominantly man-made. By presumably the 60th, which is Beatty's Hunger Game, they have then all of a sudden became natural environments, completely separating man-made from natural environments, because the capital is predominantly man-made. I don't think there's much of the natural world left to them. However, the districts still have a relationship with the natural environment, because if you look at 12 with their relationship with the coal mines and their forests, or 11 with their forests and their lumber manufacturing, or 11 with their agriculture, and even like we learned that Rue would climb trees and talk to the mockingjays, and even District 2 has their mountain. They all are connected to the natural environment. So by making the arenas look like these natural environments, the game makers and Snow is then connecting natural environment and district kids who are coming into this arena to murder one another, connecting them together and making it show like, oh, you need to think, when you see them, you think archaic barbarianism, chaos, danger. So it's giving a negative connotation to the two things. And it's absolutely fascinating to think about. But like also, like, sorry, I have a lot of thoughts. But also, the fact that the arenas in trying to recreate the natural environment is almost like a zoo enclosure trying to recreate a natural environment, and they're putting a wild animal in. However, when you break it all down, it's fake, it's man-made, and it's completely controlled by man or the capital. So I think that element of like the arenas and natural environment is absolutely fascinating. I don't know if I said this as well as I wrote it down in my notes, but I tried. I hope you enjoyed it. We recently got our first glimpse at what Lucy Graybar's rainbow dress is going to look like in the movie version of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And on first glance, I was a little disappointed because it wasn't how I imagined it while reading. However, the longer I look at it and the more I took in the details, it is perfect. It is perfect for her personality, her socioeconomic standing, and it also tells you a story, because when I look at it, it looks like she's wearing one dress and then added the ruffles on top and the corset. Now, I'm going to post pictures over my face and then put it in the corner. You can see that the fabric of the sleeves and the skirt are very similar, just a slight discoloration. But I think that this was scavenged from an abandoned feeder's costume department, because we know in the story, Lucy tells Snow that there's more outside the parameters of Panem, that her and the Cubbies used to travel around it. And we also know in Mockingjay that this is a future dystopian version of America. So it's very likely that there are abandoned feeders that they just, saw the costumes and saw the use for it. And you can tell that because the corset looks like something that could have been used in like a Shakespeare production, but the ruffles themselves are what I'm intrigued by, because they look like the bottom edging of petticoats or the tulle skirts used under dresses in productions such as West Side Story. Now I'm going to post a picture of the most recent version of West Side Story, which is the movie version, which not only do the petticoats match very similarly in colors to Lucy Gray's dress, but it would be a great homage to the actress playing Lucy Gray, because she was in that movie too. Even if, say, she did not get the materials from a theater department, if she actually came about it another way, it fits her social economic standing, because not only is she using her dress that probably she inherited from her mother, which she inherited a lot of them, we learned, or maybe it was given to her as payment for, performing. We can tell that she took a dress and added the ruffles right on top of it. But also, it looks like the sleeves probably would have been longer. Then she did a smocking pattern on the cuffs with rainbow thread, which I love that idea, detail. But smocking was very common back in the day because it was too costly to cut patterns to fit your very particular size and shape. More commonly, dress and outfit patterns were very square and rectangular shape that you then either pinned, cinched, sewed, or tied to fit your form. Another style was, again, the smocking, which you see on her sleeves. That was common at cuffs and collars for lower classes, not just lower, but everyone, for usually your undergarments, to tailor this big stretch of fabric. In addition, the corset is painted, which would make sense if she got the corset, say, secondhand, because it's a little bit harder to embroider on something that already has the boning, and that would be a lot of thread, and that would be also a lot of cost. The ruffles only cover a certain amount of real estate on the dress, so she could have scavenged the fabric, because to ruffle, it takes a long strips of fabric, and via a particular sewing style cinches it, and that's very costly to have that much fabric, plus the dye. I'm running out of time, but overall, I love this dress because of the story it tells, and it fits very perfectly within her social economic standing, and I can't wait to see the trailer. Thank you so much for this question. I would love to talk about the evolution of the Hunger Games. I think this is going to probably have to be in 3 parts. I keep trying to do it in less and it's not working out. But if you have not read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because you're a little salty, it was not going to be about Haymitch or Phoenix's games, it was about young President Snow, you are missing out. It was so interesting to watch the sparks that ignited into the inferno that is the version of the Hunger Games that we know from the original trilogy, because it did not look like that in the beginning. In the beginning of this book, even the capital citizens were uncomfortable and did not want any part of the games, because the original start of the games and the purpose was an eye for an eye. Pretty much when they talked about it, it was them pretty much saying that you killed our kids, so we're going to kill your kids and let's not do this again. But after 10 years, that hunger for revenge has been pretty much satiated, and now it's getting a little uncomfortable. And also, the games took up probably about max 2 to 3 days, like the reaping day and then however long the games actually last, which was that they just took the 24 kids, immediately dumped them into an abandoned arena, which probably was like a football arena with a bunch of weapons, and then it'll be over within a couple hours to maybe a couple days. And so pretty much everyone from the capital to the districts could forget that this occurred for the other 363 days of the year. So at this point, the president, Dr. Gall, and some of the other officials were seeing the writing on the wall, and they don't want it to end for their own varying reasons. So Dr. Gall probably suggests, let's bring in some students to help amp it up, revamp it, because the original idea of the Hunger Games came from one of her old students. So she has a bunch of these students become mentors. So they not only contribute to how to reconnect people to the games, but they are also connected to the tributes. There's something that they get to win out of it. And during this time, I'll explain in the next video some of the things that they implemented, but Snow, through his experiences, sees what's missing in the games, how can we improve it, but he also at one point goes to District 12 and learns that the majority of the homes don't have TV, and they have very poor reception, so most of them don't even watch the games, so they're missing the point of the message, which is a reminder of the death, destruction, and chaos that had come about during the time of the war, and we don't want to repeat that. So that is the point of the games, to him at least, is a constant reminder, let's not do that again, let's not enter that phase of our society. And if they don't have reception, then they're not learning the message. However, during this time, I think Dr. Gall learned that let's not have capital citizens be the mentors, because they spend a little bit too much time with their district tributes, and that kind of started shattering the wall that is separating us versus them, because that is the point of the games. It is us, the capital, versus them, the districts, and some of their mentors were starting to realize that there is very little to no difference between them. This is part 2 of me answering this question, and I'm going to go into more details in this video about what were some of the changes that were implemented during the 10th Hunger Games that will later grow into what we know as the 74th Hunger Games. Prior to this year, the games pretty much took place in 2 days, like the reaping day and then the day that the tributes all arrived immediately from the train and dumped into an abandoned arena where it was an open space with just weapons, so there was nowhere to hide. So basically they were finished within a couple hours to maybe a day max, and then completely forgotten about for the rest of the year. Now, this version of the games automatically changed. So they not only brought in mentors where Dr. Gall prompted them going, what was the reason of having the games? And a lot of them agree that, at least the capital students agree, that the purpose of the games is to act as a reminder of the death, destruction, and chaos that occurred during the war. This on a smaller scale as a glimpse of being let's not do that again. That's what they think, at least. Then Dr. Gall also prompts them of how do we make people care. So one student says, well, I like the dog fights and dog races because I can bet on them and win money. So they're yeah, we should do that. And someone else goes, well, you know what? More people would want to be involved if they can then donate money to send in food and water. So then they're helping prolong the chances of their designated tribute that they want to support and betting money on to survive. And so we start getting things like that. And then also we are seeing already a change by, instead of sending the tributes immediately into the arena, they're put into a zoo where capital citizens can go see them for the week or 2 leading up to the games. So they're seeing them for a little bit longer, and then they also get to see them during the interview process, which only a select few tributes actually follow through. Most of the mentors couldn't get their tributes to go, but the tributes that did do the interview did see an increased amount of money from the capital that was then able to be used by the mentors to send them food and water. But on top of that, they brought in a host, which completely changed the tone of the games. No longer was it just a thing, a ceremony that everyone has to kind of suffer through once a year. Now it's turned into a reality TV show with a host being involved. And now it's lasting for weeks instead of days. And so obviously the tone is changing, but on top of that, the arena changed because there was a bombing days prior to the actual event. So all of a sudden, it's not just an open field. There's a little, holes and things falling down to hide and climb and, use. So all of a sudden, they're not out there in the open killing one another. They can go into hiding, which also meant that the capital needed game makers to kind of push them into action, to push things to happen, and that's where we get the snakes and stuff. So all of a sudden it's getting more interesting for the viewers, and that I think completely changes the tone. It goes from a ceremony prior to the 10th Hunger Games to now a reality TV show. So yeah, the third and final part of me answering this question. What you don't see is the last bit, which is her asking if, you know, how the the tributes, altered into becoming more televised public figures. Because before this point, they were pretty much just sacrifices, faceless, nameless sacrifices. After the 10th Hunger Games, all of a sudden, we are connecting with them. They are taking the time to interact with them being putting the tributes in the zoo for the Capitol citizens to then go see and talk to and watch. All of a sudden, they're getting to see their faces for a longer period of time and see this like humanity of them before they are then forced to unalive each other. But then we start getting the interview process, so they kind of get like, feel like they have a glimpse at their story and write their own story on top of them. Because immediately in the Hunger Games, the original book, we see that Katniss's story and her life no longer belonged to her the moment that she became a tribute. Effie, the moment that like first evening that they arrived in the Capitol, is gushing about how she was telling the tale of Katniss's, you know, love story of sacrificing herself for her sister, altering the story to then create this new narrative to then sell to the like Capitol citizens. Katniss's life no longer belonged to her. Same with these tributes now. Their lives don't no longer belong to them, because now we have a host, now we have interviews, and now we have citizens, you know, imposing their own ideas and stories and beliefs on these people. And that's when you also, like in the Hunger Games, we see them start to take on personas, you know, with that whole experience of like Hamish trying to figure out what Katniss's persona is going to be. But in addition to that, let's look at how we view people today in our own society. Because think about the like major celebrities, like actors and singers and all those people, like it feels like there's a disconnect between them and us. Like there's a glass between us, that they're almost not real. And it's the same with also just like people here on TikTok, that we can forget that they're real people on the other side. And then that's where like some people feel comfortable sending death threats and bullying, because there's a disconnect all of a sudden, because there's a glass screen separating them and us. Or in the case of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, literal cage like wall between the Capitals and them. They're implementing the us versus them. So it's so much easier to implement our own stories, impose our own stories onto them, because they're not real to us anymore. They're just characters. And that's what the tributes become. There's something for us to root up, you know, for, because we decided this is how we're going to view them and this is what they are. We don't know the real narrative anymore, because it doesn't matter, because now they're for us. They're our characters to play with. So I was just listening to the trailer of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes for like the 20th time. I just like listening to it now. I love like the music and the words and everything. It's going to be amazing. I'm so excited. But I just had this realization that I totally should have had when I was doing an in-depth literary analysis of this book. But I realized Shayna's is the equivalent to Ned Stark, that their moralities lead to their downfall. So slight spoiler alert going ahead for, I guess, both, but you should probably know about Ned by now. But Ned's morality, his strong belief in morality, his unmovable belief, is his fatal flaw, because he believes that what is moral and what is right will come to fruition, and so he underestimates the lengths that others would take, and that leads to obviously Ned's beheading. And we see something similar with Shayna's. Now, Shayna's is so morally good. He isn't a perfect person, as we see, but he believes in the best of humanity and sees the potential, at least, in good. And especially Snow, because Snow is one of the few of his classmates who didn't obviously ostracize him growing up, so he assumes they're friends, and he sees the best parts of Snow, because we get glimpses at those good parts of Snow too as we read. However, either Shayna is blind to or willfully ignores the flaws to Snow, and willfully, I guess, ignores the fact that Snow has been slowly swaying towards Dr. Gall's beliefs rather than Shayna's beliefs. So like, literally, Dr. Gall is the angel on Snow's shoulder, and I mean the devil, and Shayna is the angel on Snow's shoulder. But it's because Shayna believes so strongly in Snow's potential for good that he accidentally walks himself to the gallows, basically. Like, he accidentally sets himself up for Snow to betray him and leads to his death. So yeah, I kind of love now, the more I think about it, the fact that Shanus is the equivalent to Ned Stark, that their moralities led to their downfall, and like it's because of how strong they believe in the goodness in others and the rightness that they kind of ignore the lengths that other people will go in this life. So yeah, I love this. I love this story. I cannot wait for this movie to come out. Oh, it's so good. I think I have a theory as to the origins of the name The Hunger Games, and I'm basing this mostly off of the context from The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the prequel to the Hunger Games series, because in here we learned that originally the Hunger Games was more like a sacrificial ceremony that lasted at most 2 to 3 days. So the reaping day, and then all the 24 tributes were put on a train, dumped into an open field arena filled with weapons, and then that would last maybe a couple hours, at most a day, so 2 to 3 days. And so that was not long enough for the tributes to become hungry. So it doesn't make sense to name the games the Hunger Games revolving around the tributes being hungry. No, I think it's a tongue-in-cheek name to reference what the capital went through during the war. Because during the war, as we learned here, the rebel districts set up a blockade, cutting the capital off from the rest of the world, and they were not self-sufficient. And so they had a very limited amount of food, and so they were forced to go to some pretty desperate lengths just to survive. And as we learned from Snow, there were some citizens that resorted into cannibalism just to survive. And as we see with Dr. Gall, she believes humanity at its worst. She thinks that if you don't have government supervision, humans will go to the darkest animalistic parts of themselves. They will resort to that. So I think the Hunger Games is also, we learned from here that it's pretty much an eye for an eye. Like, you killed our kids, we're going to kill your kids as retribution. And so it makes sense that they're trying to constantly remind them, like, look what you did to us. This is, because of you forced us into this situation where we became our worst selves. And now we're going to force your kids into a situation where we're going to make them become their worst selves. So I think the origins of the Hunger Games is not, not the whole game themselves, but the title, the name of it, is not to reference the kids within the games growing hungry, because it didn't last long enough to do that. I think it's in reference to the capital growing hungry and becoming their worst selves just to survive during the war. So yeah, that's my theory, at least.
I'm sure he believes that he is in love and cares for Lucy Gray, but he doesn't.
I'm stitching this because while I agree with everything she says, because she is completely right, Snow does view people of a means to an end. How can I use them to benefit myself? I personally think Snow did love Lucy as much as he could. The thing is, with Snow, security was always going to beat out love, because it was not like he was without love in his life. He was loved by his parents, by his grandmother, by his cousin. We saw time and time again that being shown. The thing that he was missing in his life was security. He didn't know if he would have food on the table, if he would eat that day. He didn't know if they'd be able to keep their family home. And thanks to the grandmother, their family home is linked to their identity, and identity is the most important thing that you can have in your life. More important than food, according to the grandma. So when it came to that final decision of, do I run off in the woods with Lucy and be in love, but, food and shelter aren't a guarantee, or do I go back to civilization because I finally got what I wanted since the very beginning of the book, which is an offer by the university to go there, which will more likely give me a guarantee to having food and shelter and stability and security in my life. He was always going to pick that option. And if he needed, you can also tell, he didn't need love in his life, because, if he did, he would have accepted Sejanus, or Shanus's, however you want to pronounce his name, friendship if he was desperate for love, which he's not. He's desperate for security. And honestly, I think also, though, Snow did love Lucy a little bit more than Lucy loved Snow. And I'll explain that a little bit more in part 2. This is part 2 to a video I'm going to link down below regarding the Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes, and why I think that Snow might have actually loved Lucy more than Lucy had loved Snow. Now, just like with Snow, Lucy also uses people for her benefit. The difference, though, is that Snow is using it purely for himself. He thinks purely of himself, that he is the center of the universe, and anyone that's orbiting him that benefits from him, that's great, but don't care. Whereas Lucy is a little bit more communist, that everyone has a part to play to support the Covey family. Now, in District 12, everyone seems to have a material good that they were selling, whereas the Coveys are selling entertainment, and you could argue they're selling themselves. So I think Lucy has learned to compartmentalize her person, to separate her true self with the thing that she is selling. She's putting on a mask, a character, an act. And, you can see how they entertain. They're not just playing instruments, they're interacting with the crowd to get more money. And we can tell a little bit from what Billy Tope says that she's, in the past strung along other people. And at the end of the book, if you read between the lines, it seems like she's willing to go however far if it means providing for the family, something similar that Snow's cousin had done to put food on the table during the war. And we also do know, though, from Billy Tope that Lucy was the one to encourage him to go to the mayor's house to pursue the mayor's daughter. Now, Lucy was probably thinking, like, for a marketable reason, like, string her along so we can get some more money, underestimating that Billy Tope is a romantic and doesn't think like how she does, so it backfired. But I also think that Lucy acts differently around Snow when she is in the capital versus in District 12. When she is in District 12, she is sweeter, more loving, a little bit more like the ingenue. Now, you could argue that it's because she is safe, that she is on her home turf, but I think that it felt fake, personally, for me when I read it. It felt like she was putting back that mask that she uses that with anyone else that she's stringing along. She saw the potential value that Snow could provide for her family. So she was gonna, string him along, versus how she interacts with him in the capital, which is a little bit more, in my opinion, the real version of her. It was a little bit more distant, not as sweet or, ingenue-like. It was her real self, because I think when she got there, she, yes, did continue to string him along because, habits die hard, but it also was going to increase her chance of potentially surviving, because she knew she had an extremely slim chance, and because she had an extremely slim chance, she was afraid that she was going to die in there, not herself. She was going to die in there still wearing that mask, still putting on that act, and she didn't want that. So I think that's why she wanted to interact with Snow and, like, the other District 12 tribute, and finally be her real true self. And it goes back to something that Peeta said in the beginning of the trilogy, where he says, I want to die in there as myself. Pretty much, I don't want to die in there doing whatever act or being whatever character the capital wants me to be. I want to die as myself. And that's what Lucy wanted, and I think that's why she acts very differently with Snow in the capital versus in District 12. And I think, though, she never did love Snow. It was just in the capital, it was her chance to be her real self, to finally show someone in her life the real Lucy.
Somebody offers you roses, remember, you can eat them. Throw off your loved ones by...
I saw this and immediately thought of, I don't have the book on me, I actually gave it to my aunt to read, but it's the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, because there's a scene where Snow meets Lucy at the train station and gives her a rose, and then she starts to eat the petals, which it weirds him and us out, because we don't normally connotate roses as being a food source, as being edible. And it's interesting because it's showing both Snow and us as incapable of surviving on our own outside the safety of our society. When we think of food, we think of only the clean, polished end product of food. We don't think of how it got to that point. We don't think of the sources. Same with anything in our lives, any of the, amenities, any part of our lives. We don't know things at its sources. We only know the end product. So it kind of it makes us not disabled, I can't think of the right term, but it pretty much makes us incapable of surviving outside the safety of our society, And it's interesting because it's showing that Lucy knows these things at its source, that she can survive outside their society. She has a good relationship with nature, whereas when Snow is in District 12, he is more afraid to have his back to the woods and the angry crowd in front of him. And the sad thing about this, now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't think about it any of the other times I've read this book, is that Snow starved during the war, and yet they had a food source. His grandmother had an extensive rose garden up on the roof. They had food, and they didn't even know it because it wasn't the clean, polished version. In the capital, the version of food that they know and that they hoarded even later in the original trilogy is the canned version of the lamb stew. The finished products, nothing at its core source. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Fashion has become one of the iconic identifiers of the Hunger Games series.
If you haven't watched my full video, I highly recommend checking it out. Sadie Rose does an amazing job digging into the fashion within the Hunger Games, but all her Hunger Games videos are amazing. But I'm stitching it because I would love to add something to the conversation. It's actually something I briefly brought up in one of my videos where I did a deep dive literary analysis of the Hunger Games as I reread it. It's on my page. You might have to dig a little bit deeper. Sadly, don't have the playlist settings. But it involves fashion, because as I was reading them describe the capital fashion, it made me instantly think of 1700s France fashion, so Marie Antoinette reign. And it's, especially the wigs are the easiest comparison, but the clothing too, but also the fact that that was the fashion of the nobility pre the French Revolution, and this is the fashion of the upper class, the capital citizens pre a rebellion. The mirroring of the two, of the fashion of the upper class pre a rebellion or revolution. And like, you know, for instance, the wigs are the most obvious example. You know, when we think of Marie Antoinette's style, we think of the towering wigs. Literally at one point during the American Revolution, when they were helping out, it was notorious that one lady not only had the towering hair, but she had a ship in it because they would put things in it just to be over the top a little bit more, to make themselves different. And this is just the upper class, and it's things like that. The fashion itself was one of many reasons why they rebelled against the upper class. And we see that in, you know, the Hunger Games. There were many reasons why they were going to rebel against the Capitol, but it was just the strangeness, the over the top, the waste of money, and why are they so fixated on what wig and what outfit and what tattoo they're going to get when we're starving, which is exactly what was happening with the French population. They're like, we're starving. That's where, you know, we get that incorrect famous saying of let them eat cake, when she said let them eat bread, because they were literally starving at that time with Marie Antoinette. But the other interesting thing with the French Revolution, just a sidetrack, is that the outfit, the dress that they claimed for themselves as a dress of the rebellion, is actually nearly identical to the dress that they hated Marie Antoinette for wearing. It's been a while since I've read this. Queen of Fashion, highly recommend. It's a nonfiction about Marie Antoinette, but I believe it's called a chemise de la robe. It might have been a while, but she wore that and they hated it because it was too plain. It was ruining the silk industry, which was what France was known because it was made out of cotton. And the thing that it's so interesting, they hated her for that, but yet the rebellion took that dress and claimed it as the dress of the rebellion. So I wouldn't be surprised if, like, the rebellion, if we had continued to look at what the society looked like in the Hunger Games, I would not have been surprised if they started wearing clothes that they had seen the tributes wearing during, like, interviews and during the games, reclaiming it as the clothes of the rebellion. So it's just something to think about. But yeah, I like the comparison of these, like, historical within this series. This book's so good, by the way.